the time has gone 1 o'clock, so I will just make a start. Welcome to the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee. I have an apology from Councillor Elder, and I know that Councillor Marie Lafiso is not far away.
Apology for slight lateness from Doug Hall, who's still arguing in the car park.
Okay, and I'll accept those. I'm happy to move them if someone will give me a seconder. Thanks, Councillor O'Malley. All those in favour say aye. Against? That's unanimous. Well, it's carried anyway. Now then, confirmation of the agenda. I'd just like to move from the Chair that the agenda be adopted, and in relation to standing orders, we will take option C, which is 21.4. Have I got a seconder? Thank you, Mayor Hawkins. Any discussion? Councillor Vandervis.
Regarding 21C, we've been spending a lot of time always adopting it at the beginning of every meeting, and I had hoped that this training we might be able to actually formally just make it the default. Is there any progress being made in that regard?
I think we'll have to ask the Chief. I'd be happy if that was the case too. Yeah. We are due to have a review of standing orders, is that?
COVID and then the various extra workshops that we've put in for the LTP have been our priority, but we are intending a review of standing orders and the Code of Conduct, and that's when we had looked to do that. There is nothing to stop Council, if it wanted to, requesting that we do make that change to that particular part of standing orders now, but it would require a 75% majority of Council to make that change, I think. Is that right, Claire? Yes. Yeah.
Can I move in that direction, hoping that 75% of us would like to save the time and bother?
Well, you can, but I think we'll have to move this motion first.
Certainly.
Is that correct? Or can you do it as part of it?
You would need to consider it. It's a change to the standing order, so my advice would be you would need a paper to suggest it, a very short one-pager, but I'm happy to progress that if that would be helpful.
That sounds ideal. I'll withdraw my proposal.
Okay, thank you there, Councillor Vandervis. Okay, in that case, I'm moving that we adopt the agenda. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? That's unanimous, thank you. Declarations of interest. Just like to, Councillor Vandervis, changes?
I have resigned from the Dunedin Heritage Fund, so that needs to be something which is noted, I believe, in the declarations of interest. No longer on the Heritage Fund.
Is there any other changes for anyone else? No. Well, if that's the case, I'll just note that we'll confirm and amend the proposed management plan for elected members. I've got a seconder. Councillor Hall. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Now, Part A reports the financial result. Mr Logie.
Thank you, Chair. Maybe if I just refer members to page 21, which is just the graphical summary of where we're at year to date for the first quarter. Operating result for core council, excluding Waipori, is running ahead of budget, represented by the red line there. In terms of cash flow, again, running ahead of budget, which is positive. And CapEx, on the third graph, slightly ahead of budget, slightly ahead of last year, sorry, but we are running about 80% of the year-to-date budget. So if anybody was to ask me, will we hit 100 million by the end of this year, I suspect so, but whether we'll hit the 125, I think we might be struggling. Debts, obviously, because of the shortfall in capital expenditure, is slightly below budget. So other than that, I'm happy to take any questions on the substantive report.
Any questions? This might be a very quick meeting. Happy to move, Mayor Hawkins. Seconded, Councillor Geary. Any discussion? Well, if that's the case, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? It's carried. Thank you. Item 6, which is the work plan for the committee, the forward work plan. Has anyone got any questions of item 6? Would you like to comment on it, Gavin.
I'll just make a quick comment. What we're going to do for next year for this committee is try and align the meetings with a quarterly result so that, and then what we'll do is every alternative month the finance report will just go straight to full council. So effectively what we'll try and do is have the Waipori result and the quarterly result come to the one meeting, so that way you get to see all those reports on a regular basis.
Does that mean that the fourth quarter meeting for next year will be in November?
So effectively what we'll do from the start of the calendar year, so the December report will come to a February meeting, the March report will come to a May meeting, the June report to come to an August meeting. So it just means that we can do the report, do the financials for the quarter. It goes through an ELT review and then it comes to you guys as a completed report. So effectively it's just a month and a bit, so it'll be the first.
So September report will come to a November meeting?
Yep.
Any other questions, Gavin? Councillor O'Malley?
Hey, Mr. Chair, I'm just looking at the timetable for the letters of expectation to the CCOs. Is that next month?
So now that we have a chief on board, Ms Graham and I will work on a process to get that letter of expectation drawn up, ready for presentation. So it'll probably, if it doesn't come to this committee, it can come to full council.
Okay.
obviously
And we'll
it needs to be
be
done
getting a draft of it.
Yeah,
before.
it'll be done before Christmas because obviously we need to obviously inform the statement of intents, which the CCOs will start preparing.
Cool,
I
thank
met
you.
with the chair of Dunedin City Holdings on Friday afternoon and we discussed a formal process for how we would bring that in front of council.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'm willing to move the recommendation from the chair on that the committee notes the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee Forward Work Programme. Seconded Councillor Hall. Any discussion? Oh, well, I'll just say it's good to see these programs and it's good to know what's there, what's coming up. So other than that, I'm ready to put, or any other speakers? I'm ready to put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. Item 7, the outstanding resolutions. Any comment, any discussion, any questions? Would you like to speak to it, Gavin? Happy to move. Councillor Walker. Seconded Councillor O'Malley. Any discussion? Councillor Vandervis.
I'm not sure if it's related or if it's ideal for this particular item, but given that it does include council-controlled organisations, we haven't had a lot of information going forward on what kind of dividend stream may be available in the future. And the dividend streams we've had in the last 3 years have been extremely, well, low. I think is the best way you could describe them. Are we going to get any kind of forward planning in terms of what our council companies that we have a very heavy investment in are actually going to be good for in the coming year?
Well, those things are guided by the statement of intent and the letters of expectation, so we do know when we are due to return to dividend. But would you like to speak to that, Mr. Logie, or Ms. Graham? No? Yeah.
I understand that the statement of intent is supposed to give a guideline as regards what they're going to be doing, but in terms of what they're able to achieve and in terms of what they intend to achieve on the basis of the statement of intent, I'm a bit concerned that in the past we used to get more information regarding what was coming forward. I've been here long enough to remember dividends up to $23 million in a year. There's a big fat zero now for the last 3 years and no real indication of how that might change.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, is it possible for perhaps you to have some informal discussions to see if we could get some indication, in addition to a statement of intent, obviously, on what might be proceeding from the companies in future?
Yeah, and I think as we all know, some of those dividends were driven in such a way that this is possibly why we haven't got dividends at the moment. But look, I will undertake to have discussions. We're meeting tomorrow, so I will get some discussions.
great.
I'll get back to you. Thank
Thanks
you.
very much. Thank you.
Oh, Ms Graham.
I think this is where the letter of expectation needs to be potentially done differently as well, so that councillor as shareholder can articulate to the companies what their expectation is. They can then take that expectation and feed it into the statements of intent. And so I think that, and I had that discussion with the chair on Friday.
Thank you. So I'm willing to move that resolution. I've got a seconder, Councillor Hall. Any discussion? Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm getting excited. Oh, well, if that's the case. Any other speakers? I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? It's carried. Thank you. And now items for consideration by the chair. And I'll just note the one that Councillor Vandevers has just spoken on. Sorry, what was that? No, it's not a record. I can do better than this. I'm willing to move. Or there's nothing. So if that's the case, I'll just close the meeting at 13 past 2. 13 past 1. Thank you very much.
We can't start the formal part of the meeting until 1:30, but we can start the public forum. So today we have joining us Linda Miller, the Chairperson of Study Dunedin, who will provide us an update on Study Dunedin. Welcome, Linda.
Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Linda Miller, toko ingoa, no Ōtaputi, aho, and it's my pleasure to be here representing Study Dunedin, for which I am the chair. I'm assuming that most of you are aware of Study Dunedin. Basically, it's an organisation that supports international education in the city. The aim is to ensure that incoming international students see Dunedin as a compelling destination for their educational journey. And the members of the group are made up of a mix of tertiary providers, secondary schools, the DCC, and we also have representation from Education New Zealand, which is the Crown entity charged with looking after international education. So our role this year has really been hugely impacted by COVID-19, and that's been the focus of the work that we've been doing over the last 6 months or so, primarily focusing on supporting international students who are here, the institutions that they belong to, and also keeping communication with agents and host families and so on going. So the sorts of things that have had to happen over the past 6 months are things like supporting students to get transport to repatriation flights, supporting institutions and so on. With there being no sign of when the borders will be open to international students, at least in the secondary and undergraduate space, the focus has turned to trying to keep our international students here over the summer break. Normally they would go home, spend time with their families and come back into the country sort of end of January, early February. But of course, currently, that would leave them unable to re-enter New Zealand and of course come to places like Dunedin. So one of the initiatives that we've been working on is the development of a summer school program. There are kind of 3 stages to that. There's a secondary program, there's a tertiary program, and there's also a section in there for students making that transition at the end of this year from secondary into tertiary to support them. It really ties in nicely with the transition that is the focus of the report that you have received, which was commissioned, of course, before COVID-19 came into being, and was focused around gathering more information on why our rate of students making that transition from secondary schools into tertiary institutions here in Dunedin was quite low, as it is throughout the country. So countries like Australia have a much higher conversion rate than we do. So the report was commissioned and funded by Education New Zealand in order to find more information about what was going on and to come up with recommendations for how we could address that particular issue. So the report itself, you have a copy of. The Study Dunedin group has been working through that in between developing the summer program and looking after the other needs of institutions during the COVID-19 time. And some of the recommendations are specific to specific institutions. Others are more general in terms of how we as a city welcome and support young people while they're here. A lot of the decision making around tertiary study is made by families prior to students actually coming here as secondary students, and so the work that needs to be done is at all levels in terms of the pre-entry, during the time that they are here in the secondary environment, but also what the tertiaries and secondaries need to do together. So I think that probably covers where we're at the moment. The intent is to have a report on the recommendations and so on sort of by about February next year. So we'll continue to work on that over the next couple of months.
Are you happy to take questions?
Sure.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, thank you for your report or your talk. I was just going to ask the question, you made the comment about students not being able to go home and so they're keeping them here over the summer. Now, generally, how are they feeling? I mean, like, it's not very nice.
Surprisingly upbeat, actually. About a month ago, the ODT came to school to do a little story about students staying, and all of the students that they talked to were really upbeat about it and excited to be here to experience a Kiwi Christmas. I was surprised, actually.
So no distress?
No.
Yep.
No,
That's really
and
good.
that's despite the fact some of them are quite young, 14, 15 years of age, and haven't been home since the beginning of this year.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Hello, Ms Miller, and my apologies for missing your presentation, so forgive me if I'm covering ground that you've already covered. I was interested in a comment somewhere in the report around the right students. Here it is, I've got it here. It was about the right students. And I guess that's around resilience and the ability to cope with being away from home, and that will be about mental well-being and so forth. What do you think needs to be happening to strengthen that? Because there are times when we have students who come who perhaps aren't really suited to being away from home or have issues that haven't been declared.
That's a huge issue, the declaration of issues. And so all schools, as part of being signatories to the Code of Practice, are required to gather information about students prior to enrolment, which we do. The difficulties come when people do not declare if there have been health issues, including mental health issues, prior to them coming. And that's where we rely on agents to help ensure that the information that we get is correct. And the reality is that we find ourselves having to deal with students with severe mental health issues that have been in place before they come. It's a really difficult one to know about prior to them coming, and often you don't know until they get here and they present with problems, and then in the delving into it you find out there was a pre-existing condition. So it's not an easy one to solve because we rely on people giving us accurate information. Yeah.
And in terms of students gathering together, I see there's been some efforts around that. How important is that I know that individual schools certainly do that in their school setting, but how important is that as they transition from school to
Incredibly
tertiary?
important for that transition process, and important just for students to be part of something bigger. Some schools have quite small international programs, so students can be quite isolated. And often international students, despite our best efforts, like to stick together, like to be with people who speak the same language, understand the culture. So it's really important to have those. And that's, a lot of the discussion we've had at Study Dunedin has been around how we can strengthen those opportunities for students to get themselves into the tertiary setting whilst they're still at secondary school, and that's often through those activities that we can run there.
And if there was one more thing that council could do, or anything that you would want to highlight, what would that be that we could do to assist in this area?
One of the things that keeps coming up again and again is, wouldn't it be great if we could provide students with some vouchers to go to the pool, or free bus transport or things like that would be hugely beneficial. For a lot of the students coming, and it was in the report I noticed, our public transport system is really lacking from their perspective because they're used to, buses every 10 minutes and undergrounds and all the rest of it. So supporting their ability to get around the city, to connect with people from other schools and so on, I think would go a long way to kind of showing goodwill from the city towards them. Because what we have to remember is that they contribute massively to this community, both from a cultural perspective and a financial perspective.
Thank you very much for your efforts.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi.
I wondered, from a homestay point of view, I've been a homestay parent myself, and do some of those families have concerns if the students go back and then, maybe that they could be exposed to risks if they then, try to come back after perhaps, maybe if they isolate, how thorough that would be, what they've been, is there concerns around that?
There were concerns at the beginning of the year when COVID was just starting to show itself, and particularly for students coming from China. And so institutions had to work through how that would be. Because we haven't got to the point yet of the borders being able to be opened, the conversation hasn't come up, but it'll be something that we will need to consider.
Yes, that's what I wondered. And so numbers, I assume, are quite down for homestay, are they?
Yes, they are. So
Yeah.
I think last figures we had were about 118 secondary age students, down from what's usually about 600.
Oh, wow.
And I think that the programs that have been most impacted have been those that rely on short stay groups, because there's two different types of students you can get. Really, that's the long-term ones who might come in for 2, 3, maybe even 4 years, complete their secondary schooling and then go on to tertiary. The others are groups of students who come for shorter periods. So the German market, for example, are generally 6 months to a year. From Thailand, we often get groups of students who come for, it might be anything between 2 weeks and 3 months. And it's those short stay groups that have been most significantly impacted because they're simply not here. Whereas the long-term ones, that's why we're able to keep them over summer, because they were intending to stay for more than 1 year anyway.
Is there an attitude from some of the students' families that their children are better to be in New Zealand because it's safer?
Yes. And I think that's one of the things we've got to remember is that once we have a vaccine, New Zealand is incredibly well positioned. I think if anything, it's really boosted New Zealand as being seen as a quality destination and safe destination for young people.
That's what I wondered. I thought once things open up, do you think we might see actually a boom?
I believe so.
Yeah.
There's still certainly lots of interest from agents, and Margot has organised an agent workshop in Auckland next week, isn't it? And there's huge interest from the agents who are based in Auckland for that. So that's going to be really good. Of course, countries like Canada and US have never closed their borders to international students, so there's going to be a cohort that we will miss out on because they will have made commitments and gone elsewhere. However, I believe that those thinking about starting their international education experience in the next year or two will, New Zealand is going to look really good.
I know the government has said that it might look at opening up the border to some students. Will any of those students come this way to Dunedin, do you think?
They're mainly looking at postgraduate and postgraduate students at the moment. That's kind of the first tier. So we've got no indication yet as to when undergraduate and secondary age students will be coming.
And if that we were allowed to bring students in and they said if we have quarantine, are our networks through the schools here have safe places that they could quarantine, or how would that work?
That's where we'd have to look at it collectively, how it could be done. And I know that some of the big schools in Auckland who may have 300 plus international students have been looking at chartering flights and bringing them over and setting up their own quarantine and so on. That's not something that could be done by individual institutions down here. We're simply not big enough, and that would be something perhaps Study Dunedin would look at, and we have discussed it in the past about how we could potentially do that. But that there's problems around that as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Laufiso.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tēnā koe, Ms. Miller. Tēnā koe mō tō mahi. Thank you for your work. I have 3 questions. Does every Dunedin High School have international students?
Yes, but I understand that one is closing their international program, and I understand that because I've been contacted by the ODT today.
Oh, okay, all right. And where are most of the international, or the bulk of the international students from, or what's the largest
Where are they
contingent?
from?
Yeah.
Mainly from Asia. Currently, I'm not aware of, there would only be a handful of European students here, so the bulk are from Asia, primarily Thailand, China, Japan, Hong Kong,
Okay,
a few
thank you.
from Vietnam.
Thanks. And as to the low transition rate, is the very high international student rates that we charge at universities a factor?
I don't believe so. I believe it's more to do with ranking of universities.
Ah, okay.
A lot of the, particularly Asian parents, are very focused on the rankings of universities. So often we will have students who may be planning to study at tertiary in New Zealand, but it'll be Auckland because Auckland is rated above Dunedin. Yeah.
Looks like we've run out of questions, so
Okay.
thank you, Linda. Thank you
welcome.
for addressing us. Now, to the meeting proper. Apologies. We have an apology from Councillor Elder, and I'll move that we accept that apology. Seconded, Councillor Wiley. Brain fade, old age. All in favour? Against? Carried. Confirmation of the agenda. I'll move that the committee confirms the agenda with the following alteration in regard to Standing Order 21.1, option for speaking and moving, that option C be adopted in relation to moving and seconding and speaking to amendments. Thank you, Councillor Walker. All in favour? Against? Carried. Declarations of interest. I assume there haven't been any changes in interest since our meeting started, so I'll move that the committee notes the elected members' interest register and confirms the proposed management plan. Seconded, Councillor Wiley. All in favour? Against? Carried. Now, just before we start on item 5, I'll just remind everyone around the table that while I would like the meeting to run and you can have as many questions as you desire, please keep in mind that we have a commitment at 3:30. So we do need to be finished the meeting, if at all possible, by then. So, item 5, Study Dunedin Transitions Report. Welcome to the table, Margot Reid and the lovely Fraser Liggett. The floor is yours. Do you wish to introduce the report? Do you wish to introduce the report or just go straight to questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After that sort of introduction, we'll just go straight to questions, please.
Questions, Councillors. Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How do you follow that? I do not know. Mr. Liggett and Ms. Reid, really interesting report. And there was a couple of things I was interested in. One was how difficult is that National Certificate of Educational Achievement to achieve? It's obviously required for long-term study. I'm not familiar with the qualification.
Thank you, Councillor Gary. So this is just the normal New Zealand's qualification, NCEA.
It is.
Yeah.
And they have to get, obviously, level 3 like everybody else. Sorry, I was looking at the title and not thinking of the acronym. My apologies. And it talks about a guaranteed pathway on page 19. A compelling story of a guaranteed pathway. Could you just enlarge upon that a little bit?
Sure. So what we're trying to achieve is a greater synergy between high schools and tertiary offerings. And as Ms. Miller indicated, often students are starting to think about their future when they're only 10 or 11, and their parents are very involved in that decision making. So they're already thinking about what tertiary might look like at that early age, and planning for it. So anything that's going to make it easier, a pathway approach, which, for example, if they started at a high school in Dunedin and part of that offer also included an offer to the University of Otago or Otago Polytechnic and a guarantee of accommodation when they got to the tertiary education stage, as long as they met the requirements of study. something like that for parents would be peace of mind, and it would also allow high schools to market in a much more substantial way with an offering like that. And it's a nice joined up approach that that Dunedin, we work very closely together, so that kind of joined up approach is actually practical and is very marketable.
So just going back to NCA Level 3, do we have any idea of the rates of passing for international students, and are there obstacles in that regard?
I'm not sure of the rates. We could find out. Obstacles generally are that English is a second language for them, so often some of their subject choices have to be quite strategic in order for them to achieve NCA Level 3. I think what works well in New Zealand is that a lot of the NCEA system is about internal assessment as well as examinations, and that allows for cultural and social differences in how they are examined.
And my final question was around on page 20, the targeted scholarships. Was there thought about who would be responsible for that? So that's a recommendation. We haven't got to that stage of actually diving into the recommendations and how they would work. So early in the new year, there's a workshop for Study Dunedin around this. What I can say is that we're about to offer scholarships for the summer program, which is a combined effort of Study Dunedin as a team to offer scholarships. So if we can do it once, possibly that's something we can look at again. Thank you, and it's a really comprehensive report. It was excellent. Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Liggett, and the very lovely Ms. Reid. We'll reverse the initial introduction. Apart from being intrigued by the word Kiwified in number 16, I did have a question around the potential barriers. And of course it highlighted inadequate public transport and the city closing early. You can guess where these people come from. I noticed that was only surveying 20 people. Is that generally, do those answers reflect the general feedback you feel from other people who visit the city? And before you answer, I noticed also the accommodation is also down there. Is that likely to become even more of an issue if we move into a post-pandemic travelling the world again?
So just to answer the Kiwified bit, which sounds possibly slightly weird, it's about them just understanding our way of life, which we all take for granted. Someone new coming here to live finds very different, so it takes a while for them to acclimatise. Well, there we go. In terms of barriers, just your second question was transport and...
It's around the numbers, because only 20 people were surveyed. Is that generally the feedback that comes?
Yes, especially from, from the European cohort and the Asian cohort, who are used to shops being open till 10 p.m. at night. And that's a way that they socialise generally, is they will go out at night and meet in malls and have dinner, and so generally their whole day starts later and finishes later. So finding our shopping malls closed at 5:30 or 6 o'clock at night, and then what they would consider little options for them to do in the evening, which is generally in the past been part of their culture, is a struggle for them.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Margaret, it's interesting you made a comment earlier on about English as a second language, and I remember the Consul General coming down from Christchurch a few years ago now, saying that basically a lot of Chinese students were taking subjects like mathematics because there was less language requirement, and that if we had better language services, there might be an opportunity to teach other subjects. Where are we moving on that particular path in terms of transitioning people for whom English is a second language into the education system?
So within NCEA, in order to complete level 3, you must have completed literacy and numeracy credits at a certain level. So they must have a certain level of English, level 2 English literacy credits, from my understanding, must be completed in order for them to pass level 3 and give them entry to university. So there will be some students who will finish NCEA here and then move offshore for further study, but those who stay in New Zealand and go to New Zealand universities must meet those NCEA literary credits.
So the point he was making was that if you were trying to encourage students to enter New Zealand universities, you would want them to a certain standard, and his idea at the time was that you would do a 1-year immersion, or at least maybe a 6-month immersion in English as a language, because there's a gap. Would you agree potentially there's a gap between saying this is a requirement for you to enter versus this is a service that we offer that allows you to enter, if you were trying to encourage students to come from countries where English is not the first language?
You'll find that in almost all the high schools in the city there will be ESOL classes and ESOL teachers. Often they are funded through the number of students that are international students and others who enter the school. So it's still a fine balance, I think, in the funding. No Dunedin High School, there's no barrier to entering a Dunedin High School from offshore, so they don't necessarily ask for English language requirements before those high school students come. So some of them will have almost no English and will just spend time in ESOL classes to start with before they even enter into normal subject study. But in saying that, there's no, in order for them to enter into normal subjects, there's no examination in English for that to happen. So it is often up to the school to decide when they're ready, and that means that it will vary. Strategically, that would have to be something that changed at a central government level in order for there to be a more even English language level for international students.
Just one last question on the end of all of that. Would we, if we're looking at conversion from high school to tertiary as an objective, and acknowledging that English might be a barrier to selection or admission, talking to the university and the Polytech and the city, getting involved in creating an environment which is not dependent on the schools and their individual activities, but rather a grouped up activity that positions these students for a good entry into the universities? I mean, would that be something that we could be considering?
Yes.
Okay.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from Councillor Walker's comment about or question around the city closing early, and I know that in the visitor industry there's certainly been feedback about a boring nightlife. I just wondered whether you had any plans or input into the destination plan to try and improve our lack of excitement in the evening. Would you like to try that one?
Thank you very much, Margot. Yes, the short answer is yes. Councillor Barker, we will be involved in the destination plan, and I think part of the work that's been done through this transitions report, as well as the broader activity through Study Dunedin, is an opportunity to reflect those voices within development of that narrative as well.
Thank you. And my second question was just around the estimated flow on economic impact would be $200,000 each year that they remain. I just wonder what the overall, this is pre-COVID, value of international education is to Dunedin and how many students?
So pre-COVID, unfortunately the figures are often well behind. So the latest set of figures we have is that on an annual basis we would have just under 5,000 international students in the city at all levels, and that would be an estimated about 200 million in terms of economic value add.
Thank you.
Councillor Lafiso.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for your work. I just have one question, and it's about the agents serving the Asian markets. So I'm assuming, is that correct, that they're Asian themselves?
There are a mixture, so a majority of the agents who are working within New Zealand work out of Auckland, and they are often Asian because they are one of our biggest markets are India and China, plus the rest of North and Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Councillor Gary.
Ms Reid, just following on from Ms Miller's comments when I asked the question around selecting the right students, that being those who can cope with being long away from home for extended periods, etc., and don't come with other issues particularly. Do you have any comments to make on the importance of pastoral care in the mix in terms of families' perception of sending their students here to Utaputi?
That's a difficult one. When I think we talk about bringing the right students, I think what we'll tend to find is that if we are wanting to attract long-term students who are here because they want to do tertiary study, their academic levels generally from their home countries are quite high and they're quite focused. And if on top of that we are interested in those students staying here and doing tertiary study, we're more likely then to perhaps promote programs at tertiary study which will also influence the city's economic future in terms of the kind of relationships that will come out of those students staying or going home with, as ambassadors to Dunedin. So the more we can concentrate generally as a rule on students who are high quality in terms of their academic ability, generally we find there are less issues with pastoral care. However, the schools in Dunedin are generally well set up. There are counsellors available. In fact, at Ms Miller's school over the COVID period, they have taken on a second school counsellor in order to ensure that all of the students, both international and domestic, are well catered for through this really trying time.
But it would be the case, wouldn't it, that just because somebody has a high academic ability, it doesn't mean to say they're not going to experience other things as a result of stress or family expectations or, at the moment, COVID and all of the general... And that pastoral care, that manaakitanga is really important.
Absolutely agreed.
I think that completes the questions. Do I have a mover? Councillor Wiley? Oh, Councillor Gary, second. Councillor Wiley. Councillor Gary, do you wish to speak?
Yes, I'd just like to acknowledge the work that's gone on behind the scenes to get to this point, and particularly in relation to the many pressures that have arisen through lockdown for our international students, through looking to the future for our international students and for those who are considering coming to Dunedin, and for Study Dunedin and our staff helping to make Dunedin a very attractive place. It's always been a city that parents have believed was safe and viewed as safe. It's been one of our points of difference in terms of people's perception. And I don't think that will lessen, it will only strengthen. I just want to commend all of those who are involved in this area, how we treat our young people that are here from all over the world, who are so far from home for much longer periods than they expected to be, and maybe coming for much longer periods than they expect to be when they finally are able to come back in, speaks to our values as a city. So I just want to commend those people. I thought that the report was excellent.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Yes, the report was excellent, and it really does cover a lot of topics. Just sort of going back a step to what Ms Miller spoke to us about as well, the importance of international education for the city, right across our tertiary and postgrad study programs. But more importantly, I think it's the case of seeing student visits and international students coming back to our city in stronger numbers and putting the best foot forward in how we make that progress in the future. But in the meantime, and again touching back a bit at what Ms Miller talked about, and as we look through the transitioning process, is making sure and thanking the families that have actually host students and take them into their houses and Kiwify them. I actually thought that was quite a good word. But you know what, they have taken on a little bit more than they expected this year. And those families are important, these local families taking on these students and taking them into the home through the holiday season, through the summer. And I just hope that we actually have a good summer though, so they can experience some great activities and really enjoy their Kiwi Christmas.
Councillor Gary, your right of reply. I'll put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. That brings us on to item 6, the Enterprise Dunedin Activity Report. Do you wish to introduce it or just go to questions?
I'm quite happy to go straight to questions, Mr Chair.
Questions, councillors. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of questions. Just the first one is around the council's COVID fund, and there was over $400,000 left in that fund. I just wonder if there's, and this bit was earmarked for economic recovery, I wonder if there's an update on where that money's at and if there is a plan for the fund.
I can answer that one, Councillor. Yes, there is some work underway on that. We've got a report coming to the October the 29th council meeting with recommendations on some activities that could be funded should council wish to at that meeting.
So following on from that, the brainstorm was mentioned, the Dunedin brainstorm was mentioned here, and I just wonder, did that come from the COVID budget or was that from a different budget?
No, that came from economic development budget.
Cool. My next question is just around the eyesight, and I was just wondering what sort of numbers have been coming through the eyesight each month as compared to 2019.
So our numbers through the door have been down a little bit. So for July, we were actually, our numbers through the door were actually 37% lower than the previous year. 37% lower in September, August 45% down, and July 46% down. The interesting figures out of it that our overall split between international used to be for 57% and domestic 43%. Of course, now we've got 90% domestic visitation and 10% international, which really tied up with those figures that are in the report, that we've still got 8% of international visitors around. Yep.
Thank you. I just also wondered about, obviously businesses are having a few challenges post-COVID, and I just wondered if there's been an uptake or an increase in the number of people or businesses using the business clinic. That wasn't in the report.
No, it wasn't in the report, Councillor. To be honest, we probably haven't seen an uptake, but we certainly have referred a lot more people to the Regional Business Partnership Program. I know the Chamber has been fully subscribed through that program, which is government funded and does provide a range of different support mechanisms directly to business. So we've been pretty actively promoting that, and we'll certainly encourage businesses to make full utilisation of that service.
So the council's business clinic, is that something that's still running?
Yes, it is still running.
And when would we expect a report on the numbers coming through that?
We could bring that to the next activity report, Councillor. Yep.
Thank you. And around number 34, the STEP funding, I just wonder what the timeline and the engagement plan are around there. I understand, does the money have to be spent by the end of June 2021, is that correct?
It's been extended. It's 18 months from when the document was signed, which was this month.
And my last question is just around an update on the Martin Jenkins review and the recommendations on that. I'm specifically interested in the recommendation around the stakeholder engagement and communications. The review recommended a voice of customer measure to be reported regularly to demonstrate progress and identify areas for improvement. Can you advise us when we'll get another update on the Martin Jenkins report recommendations and the customer business satisfaction with the work of Enterprise Dunedin?
Look, we could bring back a report on further work that's been undertaken as a result of the review. There are a number of additional customer service measures that we're putting in place. Some are driven through our customer service program of work across all of council, and others are more specific to our program. So we will make sure that we bring back some of that factual information to council in future reports, Councillor.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Yep, thank you for the report. My question is around the Great Dunedin brainstorm. I don't know who wants to answer it. And I guess the question, three-pronged question, emanates from me speaking to some people in the community who I expected to be there and didn't attend because I didn't feel it was a fit for them. So the three-pronged question is, are you happy with the quality of attendees, and were they what you expected? Secondly, would you do it again? And thirdly, if you would do it again, how would you do it differently in order to try and attract some of those obvious people in the community that probably should have been there?
Thank you, Councillor Walker. It sounds slightly remiss. I wasn't there, but the feedback that we have had in regards to the quality of the attendees was that it was a good mix of the community, and we were very conscious about the engagement and the thinking that they were provided in terms of some responses there. So I understand that GDP was very, very happy with the turnout and engagement. Your second question, would we do it again? Yes, absolutely. We have had discussions with Grow Dunedin partners regarding the brainstorm. Again, the feedback was positive. It was the first time we had done something like this, so there was plenty of lessons to learn. But as a way of engaging with the community, we were pretty satisfied. In terms of how we would attract different, perhaps, groups, it's a great question, and it's certainly something that we were thinking around in terms of the first time we had done this, in terms of different groups we would like to bring in. We've had subsequent conversations, certainly with the university, regarding different types of events like this, but certainly from an Enterprise Dunedin point of view, we think that there's a good opportunity to have more and get engagement with the community on these types of issues.
Follow-up question. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Liggett. So in hindsight, maybe too early to answer this question, but do you feel at this stage, or when will we know if it was good bang for our buck?
It is early. I personally believe, in terms of the investment that did go into the event, it was good engagement. So I'm very, very positive. I suppose the value for the buck will come through in terms of the proposals that come through it, and how they'll actually respond to the challenges that were identified for the brainstorm, and what they actually mean for the community and the businesses that we've been trying to respond to it.
Councillor Lafiso.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chairperson. Tēnā koe, Mr. Christie. I'm asking my question relating to the overview part of the report, specifically paragraph 5, talking about retail spending not falling too far. And those and other indicators, I'm recalling you're talking at annual plan time that we expect, or we're projecting more job losses, etc., around this period, November, December. Are there any indications that that's going to be so, or impacts that way?
It's a good question, thank you, Councillor. I'm not an economist, but we do have one in the room that may be able to help by supplementing my comments. We are anticipating further job losses, particularly in the coming months, probably early New Year being the worst months that we're forecasting that for, depending on what sector people are operating in. We have been relatively pleased with how our economy has performed to date through COVID, but there is no doubt that some of our sectors are going to be experiencing very challenging times, particularly those that have come off the wage subsidies and those that are perhaps in the visitor sector, in particular hospitality, where we know without the international visitors they are going to be a little bit more challenged in terms of the people that will come through their doors. But Mr Patterson's certainly across the economics far more than I am, and maybe I'll add to those comments.
Thank you, Mr Christie. Councillor Lafise, so we've been quite fortunate to get our hands on some data from Statistics New Zealand that has come out of payday filings from employers. And what we've seen is that jobs in August in Dunedin were still up 1% on a year ago. And interestingly, this is number 8 in the report, we did see some trends occurring within industries. So we saw public administration, which has central and local government within it, health, construction, and hospitality even were up on a year ago. Hospitality is probably more to do with seasonal effects being masked by the wage subsidy. At the other end of things, we did see some job losses occurring in media, some aspects of wholesale trade and warehousing, visitor activities, and a little bit in education. But the losses to date have been very muted. Part of that is that Dunedin's economy has got operational again very quickly. Part of it is also because of the wage subsidies. And data that we saw from MSD was that the majority of wage subsidies were ending in September for people that were still being supported by those. Data we've seen in September for people on job seeker support has actually shown the first month of declines in job seeker support recipients since the pandemic began. So cautious optimism there, but there is still obviously quite a tail to this from an economic perspective, and we'll see those effects over the coming months.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have actually heard some of the feedback that Councillor Walker talked about as well with the Great Dunedin Brainstorm. I was there, and as many of you know, I was a huge advocate for it to happen, and I thought it was great that we had the event, which was awesome. I think we need to do it again. I think it's something you could regularly do, around problem solving. However, my feeling was that, and my question is, do you think that, because we got a lot of sort of ideas, I personally thought some of those ideas were unfortunately were a bit low standard, and we could have got a lot better results. And I think maybe some of the reasons for that, but I'm asking a question around, do you think perhaps next time we do it, would it be possible to have, say, for example, a problem put to the group, you know what I mean? So jobs is an issue for our city. How do you suggest we resolve that? Because what you had was a lot of the different groups working on different ideas for individual businesses, maybe even for themselves. And the idea I was thinking is, we're looking at brainstorming for our city and how we can recover from COVID. And I thought if each group had an idea, maybe even they all brainstormed on the same idea, or they had different ideas around problems of our city, do you think that might have been perhaps a bit better targeted? Like maybe someone like, an economist, like we've got Benji here to come in and be, people like that who are experts in areas to help target some of that brainstorming.
Councillor Houlihan,
as well.
Could you ask a concise question, please?
Yes, so that's the two. Another question is, maybe if we had mentors there a bit more.
Short answer is yes. Look, we are doing a review over the Great Dunedin Brainstorm to learn lessons, because we want to do it again.
Yep.
We had posed 3 questions. We did have some mentors, but it was the first time we'd done it. So we want to obviously learn and take those learnings into the next ones that come forward.
Do you think there was some confusion also around messaging of the ownership of IP, and so that meant that some key people didn't turn up? And if so, how do we fix that for next time?
Look, potentially. Clearly there was some discussion around IP. As I said, we will pick that up in the wrap up around the review of it and build it into the next time we do this.
Brilliant. So just on the Alliance of Innovation, can you talk, what is sort of some of the other areas around innovation that we've looked at for the city, and particularly looking around the film industry, given we didn't get the shovel-ready money for the production studio, where are we at with that and what's likely to happen there?
We do actually have a separate paper around film, which Mr. Deaker may be able to drive in a little bit more, but you know, we do see film as one of those key priorities under Alliances for Innovation, as we do with the other creative and technical sectors such as code, and which brings us into things such as health tech. So, but Mr. will touch on probably some more of those specific details in the next report.
Awesome. And given you raised code and it is in here under this paper, I mean, the comments here are sort of quite brief. What is happening with code? Is your understanding that there's good pickup in the industry? Like, does the industry know about code? Is the messaging going out there, do you think? And are they tapping into some of that funding?
Look, again, we have a bit more of an in-depth update beyond the summary and the activity report, but generally, yeah, we're making good grounds, as demonstrated by the grants process, which we can certainly elaborate a bit later.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Raddick.
Thanks for your report, Mr. Christie and team. It's very comprehensive, and there's clearly a lot of activity going on, and I believe there's been good results. The thing with the report, there are only two economic goals: the 10,000 jobs, extra jobs over 10 years, and 10,000 of extra dollars of income per person in Dunedin. So I think it would be good, from my point of view, to be able to see some graphical representation of how we're going on those two goals, because I believe we've had good progress over the years that they've been in place. And so could we have that at some stage in the future?
Yes, we can include that into future reports, and hopefully as we go through the Economic Development Strategy Review, we can include other measures in there, Councillor, because I know Councillor Lafiso, for example, has quite rightly pointed out that those shouldn't be the only drivers and only measures of our economic development strategy.
Well, and in particular, I was thinking job growth versus population growth, to see if we're ahead or behind on that, and all sorts of detail within that. That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you. 3 questions. The first one is around conferencing. And I wonder if there has been a change in people's approach to conferencing post-lockdown, and if there's more. I know I'm aware of several that I was due to speak at where it's not just been about cancelling or postponing, they're putting them way out to be sure, but also that taking into consideration offsetting carbon emissions and whether people are considering perhaps not travelling from that point of view as well. Do you have any comments to make about that, Mr. Anderson?
Thank you. That's a good question. So I think we're seeing a trend more towards video conferencing. That's certainly apparent. I think the second part of your question is that carbon initiatives or reducing carbon emissions is going to be an integral part of the tourism and business events industry in the future. So you'll see more in the future.
And congratulations to the staff member who's leading that nationally. That's kudos for this council. A second question is around the flexibility of advertising. This is possibly for Mr. Christie. I notice in paragraph 52, talking about some advertising campaigns, how much flexibility do you have given COVID and the change in alert levels, and I mean the news yesterday around a community case through the ports? How flexible how much flexibility do you have in booking that advertising?
Well, I'll start, but I might hand over for a bit of detail around that to Mr. Anderson. But a lot of our marketing is now driven online, which does give us the ability to turn that on and off, depending on what the situation of the day determines. And the nice thing is that once you've got the marketing collateral in place, it's relatively easy to place it. But that does come with some constraints depending on the media forms.
Yeah, Mr. Christie had it exactly right. There's a lot of distressed stock around there. People aren't advertising, so it does give us a lot of opportunity. I think secondly, we say in the report, developing a whole range of playbooks. So we have scenario-based marketing planned well in advance of when we might need it. So Trans-Tasman is a good example, working through that now.
And my final question is around item 41, paragraph 41, around accommodation. And just wondering, I possibly know the answer to this, but I'll ask it anyway, is around Airbnb and the changes in Airbnb and how that influences those. I mean, they're not, it might be for Benji actually, that they're not taken into account, are they, in terms of the accommodation stats? Is that correct?
That is correct in terms of these stats. The Accommodation Data Providers Program is looking to get Airbnb and other providers of a like kind into the system. That's a huge discussion. We separately measure Air DNA, which conglomerates a lot of the work that Airbnb does. So we have a fairly good indication of Airbnb rates throughout the city.
And do you have any concerns, given that there's been quite a shift for some Airbnb providers actually either renting out their accommodation or selling their accommodation? I'm certainly aware of that anecdotally. Do you have any concerns about having enough accommodation in the city going forward?
It's a really hard question to answer given where we are, but essentially our occupancy rates for hotels and motels sit about 45 to 48% depending on the month. So at the moment, I would say we have capacity. Obviously, when big events come, that changes.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Yep, thank you, Chair, and I am cognizant still of your 3:30 call to arms. Congratulations on the work you did getting up the impending arrival of the Dunedin of the Central Target Touring Route. That's really good news, and I think in context, obviously, of domestic tourism, it could be beneficial. Are there any plans to have any ongoing investment in that area, and if so, what would that look like?
So we invested around $15,000 this financial year. I think the former mayor invested around $10,000 in helping set up that touring route. We will be evaluating that on a yearly basis. At the moment, we have a year's investment sitting within that program.
Councillor Wiley. Councillor Vandevers.
Regarding business vitality, I've noticed a bit of an uptick in complaints from people regarding building consents issues, delays, a lot of detail, and also some difficulty in finding suitable premises or land. Are those three areas, consents, premises and land, areas that you're looking at in terms of improving ease of doing business?
Council, that's probably a little bit outside of our brief. We're certainly aware of some of the constraints there are for business. We do work across council, obviously, to try to alleviate those constraints where we can, but I understand building going through quite a substantial increase in the number of consents that they're issuing currently, and I would think that bodes very well when that work actually comes through for the further development of a lot of the areas that you're talking about.
Okay, and my second question, again on ease of doing business, well, it's related. Because of the COVID issues that we see in Africa, Asia, Europe now, most other countries, there is an unprecedented availability of overseas capital now looking for safe investment here in New Zealand. I've been talking recently with people in Auckland who simply say, look, if you've got any investment at all, we've got endless amounts of money for that. Are we doing anything here in Dunedin to ensure that that investment doesn't all go to Auckland?
Yes, so we work very closely with the New Zealand Trade and Enterprise Inward Investment team. In fact, I've got a meeting coming up with them this week. So we are active in that space. I think the issue, Councillor, if I can be so bold, is not the fact that there is a lot of money and capital out there that we could get access to. It's actually the shortage of good ideas often. That seems to be the more challenging aspect.
Okay, and finally, do you converse with companies like Colliers who are in the business essentially of attracting overseas investment capital?
We do. We're working on a number of fronts and different portfolios around that, Councillor. So yes, Colliers are part of that mix, and we've been actively involved with them on discussions with further accommodation options for the city, amongst other things.
Further speakers? If not, I'm happy to move. Seconded Councillor Wiley. Speakers? Councillor Gary.
I just want to briefly commend the Enterprise Dunedin team for the amount of activity that has been going on at such a difficult time in so many different ways, and quietly in the background all of this activity has proceeded for the good of the city.
Councillor O'Malley.
Yes, Chair. Actually, I just want to make a commentary about a term I'm hearing a lot, which is when the wage subsidy goes off. I think the impact of that depends on whether you're a Keynesian or a Friedmanite in terms of your economic view, because if you believe that the wage subsidy was put in order to shore companies up as they went through the worst of the recession due to the lockdown, then those companies are expected to now be in a better position to keep their people employed. So therefore you shouldn't be expecting a tsunami of unemployment. You should be watching and seeing what we are seeing, which is the unemployment tsunami hasn't hit. And in fact, the numbers are better than you expected them to be, which means that providing resources to companies during times of stress allow them to get through that period and be standing on their feet at the other side. If we remain COVID-free, it's my feeling that basically we will slowly but surely improve our economy, and that this fear that we're about to go through another series of recessions can be an unhelpful thing to be saying, because it does actually change the people's willingness to take risks and go forward. And so I would like us to follow the numbers and follow the unemployment numbers, and if they are not tracking bad, to say maybe the wage subsidy worked, rather than to be saying, oh, now the wage subsidy's gone and I'm really afraid. Because I think, from my own personal perspective, having followed it, having been in a company that was a recipient of it, it did exactly what it was supposed to do. And therefore, we should be saying, thanks to the wage subsidy, we're better off, and hopefully with the summer and the warm weather, the economy is going to kick up. Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I want to just say, and I suppose it's supporting really what Councillor Gary said earlier, I am really delighted that our economic development unit and the people in it seem to be, anyway, from what I can see, really keen on innovation and entrepreneurial ideas. Like the Great Dunedin Brainstorm, I thought was a great idea. I didn't personally think this one worked out that well. That's just my personal opinion. I thought the ideas weren't that good that came out of it. It's no fault of the people that did it, and I think it's certainly no criticism on the staff, because I think the idea was fantastic. But I just think we learn from, if we learn from those experiences, we're only going to get better. And sometimes it takes 2 or 3 goes at these things to get it right. And I think it's awesome if, as a council, we're prepared to keep at things like that, because sometimes you don't get the results straight away. And I also think that I would love to know what some other centres are doing as well. Maybe we could tap into that and pick up some ideas that they're doing that are really good as well. And I'd imagine that some other cities might be interested to know a bit about what we're doing too, because I think we've been quite innovative. I don't think there's many cities that have gone out and done, I could be wrong, though, of course, they might say they have gone out and done a great Dunedin Brainstorm, a great Auckland one or a great Christchurch. We have, and I commend us for doing that. And that's not the only thing we're doing. We're doing lots of innovative things. We're working with film people. I know other cities are as well. But we've got Code. Now, Code is something that's really special for Dunedin. And I think we need to also remember those things, and that a lot is happening in the background. And our little city does punch well above its weight. And it's really exciting. But sometimes you have to fail to get success, and there's nothing wrong with that, because each time we do it, we will get better. And I just urge us to keep on going where we're going, because I think we're heading in the right direction.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes, following on from Councillor O'Malley's comments, I'd just like to make the point that I think, thanks to the privileged position we find ourselves in the world of COVID-19 now, I think and everything that I hear and read from in the international media suggests that we're poised and we have a great marketing advantage right now, and we could, in Dunedin, be focusing some of our economic development efforts on exports, because the rest of the world is very interested in New Zealand and very interested in buying our products. So I think there's a great opportunity on our doorstep. Rather than being prepared and worrying about a calamity to come, I think we should be worrying about and getting prepared for a windfall to come with additional exports and products from Dunedin area out to the rest of the world. So I'd like to see some economic activity directed in that, or the economic development activity directed in that area. Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
As this is the last Economic Development Committee meeting for the year, I am conscious of the reports we're receiving and what we're actually reading into it, and knowing that actually some of the impacts haven't really hit us. You know, when we look at where we were this time last year, and I just pulled up the article from the ODT last November, we were talking about 233 million international visitors, $233 million being spent by international visitors up to the financial year of June 30th, 2019. And we think about the cruise ship industry and what's going to happen going forward, and we can understand the wage subsidies and how that supported us. But really, to be honest, I don't think the shit's hit the fan yet, in my opinion. We are going to really struggle this summer, and we're going to struggle big time. We're not going to have the cruise ships, we're not going to have the international visitors, but we are a compelling destination. So when we look at our business events, our international conferences, cruise and international visitors, what I really want to see us around this table, us in this building in the DCC, and us around the city go and spend in these local tourism businesses and the local hospitality. It is our time to prop up these businesses, support these businesses, because as we read through these reports, and unfortunately there are a snapshot, but I got a feeling the one we get in February is going to be quite devastating. And I think anything we can do locally is going to be very, very important.
Mayor Hawken.
That's fine, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to comment briefly on the wider context, and I don't think we can separate out our community's economic performance from that wider context. Around 6 months ago, we were involved in conversations with the District Health Board around the region, looking at not if but when our ICU beds were going to be swamped, if and when the capacity of morgues around the region was going to be reached. Now, we didn't have to worry about that in the end, because the public health response of central government got us to a point where we didn't need to have those conversations. And the impact of that public health response certainly has hit us economically, but that has been offset both in terms of the wage subsidy since COVID-19 hit us, and also the investment in infrastructure projects over the short to medium term. And I think the headline in the paper on Saturday summed it up really: Dunedin's economy holding up. And I think, had you asked any of us 6 months ago about where we thought we might be at this point, we'd all have thought, I think, that this would be a tremendous position for us to find ourselves in. And that's not to say that, and it's not solely down to the support of government. I mean, local businesses have also done a great job of adapting and pivoting and providing exceptional offerings to our community and are being rewarded by people supporting them. And I appreciate that it is certainly more, some sectors of the economy are more stressed than others. I'm not trying to diminish that at all. And the situation that we're currently in isn't spread evenly across all of those. And we can't lose sight of the need to focus on diversifying our local economy and building sustainable industries that contribute to our other strategic objectives around our social and environmental well-being. But given everything else that's going on around the region, around the country, and around the world, we're in a pretty good spot. And I share the concerns of Councillor O'Malley that always positioning ourselves as being about to drop off a cliff does run the risk of becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy for those who are planning their business strategies and their economic activity. And I think that's something that we need to be mindful of. I'm not pretending that it's going to be easy for everyone, but it is something that I think we have a duty to as a council is to support our local economy, and part of that is not investing too heavily in talking down its prospects over the short to medium term. Thanks.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's probably sensible to be positive, even 2 days after we've had a display across the country of what positivity can do. And I wanted to thank Councillor O'Malley also for the comments he made about the wage subsidy. The wage subsidy is obviously going to remain a political football, and people who have misbehaved have been shamed into cleaning up their act. But it did serve its purpose largely, as far as I can see, and we were very lucky that we had decisions like that were made. And I'd say to the, and I'd thank the Mayor as well for his positive comments about not talking ourselves down. Let's not revert quickly or unnecessarily irresponsibly to what was the solution of the past, or what was going to save us from economic disaster. And a lot of us here lived through the whole debate about a smelter at Aramoana. I don't think I need to say anything more about how useful that would have been. But I would say to councillors, you know that the information Mr Pickford sent you about the challenges being faced, that have been mentioned already today by our building control people in this city about the number of consents that they're having to process, is a very powerful indicator of the fact that it ain't broken. And I don't think, like the other two councillors I mentioned, I don't think there's any advantage for anyone in this room or anyone in the city in talking down the situation and talking down our performance. I think we all know how lucky we are, and the indicators that we're seeing about the way retail is holding up, about the way building is actually creating difficulties in construction area, not just because of consenting, but other supply and workforce issues, the sort of projects we've got on the book. And thank goodness this council and other authorities like it in this country brushed away the demand for austerity at the start of this panic, because that would have really dropped us in an enormous hole. So I think we are in a very good position. Sure, there are challenges. Sure, there are people who are struggling. Of course, there are people who have lost their jobs, but the general indicators are much more positive than we would ever have assumed. And let's not do the absolute negative damage that some of the comments around this table today could do.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from my questions and the questions from Councillor Vandervis around business vitality and Councillor Reddick's comment on the economic development aims, I just want us to pull back our focus to the economic development strategy, a well-worn copy. While I welcome the activity reports, my concern is that they're not addressing the 13 actions in the Economic Development Strategy and the Martin Jenkins report, and I really look forward to an update of the strategy. When we fail to plan, we plan to fail, and I urge us to concentrate on actually having a plan to get us through COVID. Thank you.
Councillor Bandavis.
I believe that we have somewhat dodged a bullet in terms of the COVID response to date, but we've dodged it basically because it's been shot further down the road. We have a pre-election euphoria currently that shouldn't blind us to the fundamentals that we are going to face in the coming months and year. $50 billion was essentially printed or borrowed to get us to the point that we're at now. That can't continue. I spoke with a senior programmer who works for a number of the big banks, and he said that the banks themselves can't believe that the value of the dollar has stayed up so long, that the printing of money, which used to be described by Muldoon as funny money when Social Credit were promoting it, now has a much nicer name, quantitative easing, and everybody feels quite easy about that. The money's been spent, and thankfully we still have a lot of people in employment because of that. I accept all of that. But it has been done as a mortgage on our future. New Zealand is in a very privileged space, and the interest that overseas people wanting to come and live here and overseas capital wanting to be invested here is vast. And it's because we are seen, partly because we're an island nation, partly because we're English, partly because we've successfully fended off the COVID attack till now. All of those things have given us a very rosy look in the international scene. But in order for us to go forward, we need to develop rapidly and use that available overseas capital and overseas expertise. And Dunedin needs to attract its share, and that's where I have concerns. If you look at Dunedin statistics compared to the rest of New Zealand, employment is finally up, but it's been down for a long time compared to New Zealand averages. Productivity is still below New Zealand averages. Business growth is well below Dunedin, New Zealand averages. Population growth, we've had some, but it's still below average. Annual earnings, below average. House values, still well below New Zealand averages. So I don't believe there's any reason for us to feel complacent. I think that Dunedin, which up until not that many years ago was the 4th city of New Zealand, is now 6th and arguably becoming 7th. That if you look at the actual hard statistics about what the visitor spends are here, the number of new car registrations, the number of commercial vehicle registrations, all of those stats remain below New Zealand average. We can do better, we should do better, and we need to recognise, and I thank Councillor Wiley for bringing up the issue, we need to recognise that in a post-election environment where the big money is no longer being spent on bailouts, things are going to be very tough for some people and may become tough for all of us. So productivity, I believe, is the main thing that we need to be looking at. And Mr. Christie mentioned that there's not a lack of financial investment ability, but really a lack of brilliant new ideas or new kinds of business to get into, perhaps even new crops to be developed or whatever. Those are challenges that we need to look at very closely, and recognising that we do have enormous potential and some way to go to catch up to New Zealand averages. Thank you.
Any further speakers? Okay, as my right of reply, I've said in the past, I'm a glass half full person. And I think we all have to be mindful that we have gone through a very disruptive period. And we probably can't easily predict just what is going to happen. But I'll point to a few positives. Being a city that's reasonably diverse in its business sectors, strong knowledge base, a growing strength in innovative new businesses, I tend to think that we're probably going to come out on the better side of this as a city. If we look in our region, it's clear that Queenstown, because it had such a high tourism focus, is going to find this really hard. Hopefully, New Zealanders will step up and take a holiday in Queenstown and help them out. I think for ourselves, yes, we're going to have a hole. We're going to have a hole because of the loss of the cruise ships, and that's going to have an impact on our tourism businesses, specifically those that were based around a lot of international tourists and the cruise ships. And we need to be mindful of that. And as a council, and I know as Enterprise Dunedin, we are looking at how we can help that sector recover. But it's not going to be easy because of the fact that our borders won't open again, I don't believe, until there is some form of immunisation, and that seems to be a pretty variable date. So I think we do need to be positive. I think we need to get the message out when we see positive things, and I agree entirely with Councillor O'Malley. If we keep on preaching doom Doom is what we will get. I think, and I believe that's the case for the whole of New Zealand. We've been the nation of 5 million people, the team of 5 million people, and I think that's going to be really important as we go through the recovery. We have to do everything we can, all of us have a part in that, to help the economy by spending money wisely, spending locally, getting out and about, doing a bit of travel that we wouldn't have done because we used to trip off overseas or disappear out of the country. I think we do all consciously need to think about that. But as I say, I think right now Dunedin is in a much better position than some other cities, and that our future, provided we keep a positive outlook, will be a good one. All those in favour? Against? Carried. We move on to one of the highlights for us, the Centre of Digital Excellence. We get the update report. Do you wish to introduce it or just go for questions?
Happy to take it as read.
Questions. Councillor Gary.
Thank you. Paragraph 14 around the visiting chair. I assume originally there was thought about an international visiting chair, but obviously now that has huge complications, particularly if you're looking to 30 to 90 days. What are the plans and is it possible to do that nationally?
That is the intention at present, given the current constraints and border restrictions. We believe that there's some good candidates, and we're certainly in discussions with the university in regards to those as well to get this moving.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. It's great to read this report and see the exciting things that are happening in Code. Can I go back to my questions that I asked earlier? Just around what is your feeling from the industry as to how much they know about the Centre of Digital Excellence. Do you think there's a high awareness within our, digital community in Dunedin? And of course, we're the centre for New Zealand, I think, aren't we? So nationwide and following on from that, what sort of pickup are we getting with the funding and the, what are you seeing flowing from this?
Thank you, Councillor Houlihan. Short answer is yes. I think locally, nationally, and even potentially internationally, code is starting to get some cut through. So certainly locally, there has been quite an active game development community here for some years anyway, and I think code has been able to augment that with meetups, and certainly in the last 12 to 18 months since we've been working on code, and pre-COVID too, being able to have access to some international business people such as Tabitha Hayes and others who have come, also representatives from JP Games in Japan, have certainly added octane into the local ecosystem, not just for game developers, but for others within the community too. So yes, I think there is general excitement and interest. In addition to that, a great deal of interest around the grants locally, and also some great interest nationally and internationally about how our grants program has worked, how it's been structured, and what the focus is. And so, yes, I believe there has been quite a lot of interest, and there will continue to be. That's great to hear. Yeah, I was hoping we'd have a big pickup with the grants. I saw recently that, is it Dean Hall or Rocketworks, is doing some amazing. Do you think some of the success of the companies that we've got here has come from this, from code?
In short, there was obviously existing companies here when we commenced code. It feels like a very long time ago. What we are seeing is obviously changes in terms of people being attracted into the city, and also thinking of new companies being generated through the grants process or through the engagement that our establishment director, Tim Ponting, is doing within the gaming space. So it's probably a bit of both, to be frank. It's recognising what we've got here, but also growing and attracting gaming companies to the city.
That's great. So are we seeing quite an increase in gamers coming to live here solely because of the fact we've got code? Are we seeing a bit of that?
I think we will see more of that as time unfolds, and perhaps as the results of some of the grants starts to bear fruit in coming months and years, and as that whole program starts to unfold, that is a possibility. I think it's also a great retention tool to enable those that are currently already in Dunedin to see that this is a strong place to be if you wish to develop a game. It probably aligns really well with a lot of the work that Code is doing with the two tertiary providers, because what we're wanting to do is develop a pathway and, if you like, a pipeline of opportunities for people to come through and be educated and developed in game development and creating MVPs. So sort of a combination of various things, I think, will both retain people within the city and subsequently also attract others into the city too.
Councillor Vandervis.
I was very interested in the ambition of Code to grow $1 billion games industry and to maximise economic and social outcomes through the developing of a niche games for health sector. As somebody who had a relative visiting for several months recently, who was extremely keen on games, in fact would play up to 14 hours at a stretch, I'm wondering what games for health might actually involve. I haven't seen any yet.
Thank you, Councillor Vandervis. Sometimes it's a term we look at in terms of games for health, and wonder whether it actually explains exactly what we're trying to achieve with this part of Code. During the business case, when we pulled Code together, there was a recognition that gamification or game engines could be actually used for serious issues, whether or not it was for recovery for injuries, whether or not it was around diagnostics, whether or not it was around a variety of different tools for treating symptoms that patients may have. This was certainly identified as conversations with the industry, but also with the Southern District Health Board as well during the early days. So probably when we talk around games for health, it probably doesn't quite explain the nuance that we are seeking, that we are trying to maximise, I suppose, the opportunities that exist with developing this sector in relation to what is happening within the hospital around the health transformation project that is happening there. So it's possibly a language issue that we do need to continually keep on working on.
Thank you for that. That makes some sense. I still wonder, a $1 billion video games industry is what you're seeking to grow. My understanding of the big money in games is that big money arises fundamentally through games are designed to be addictive, and addictive game behaviour would seem to be not a game for health.
Thank you for reminding me of your other question. It is an ambitious target that we have that has been set for us by the government for code. One of the things that we would just respond in terms of the point around addictive nature is that code itself has developed a set of principles that we are certainly trying to operate around in terms of focusing perhaps around those less addictive or those more a broader nature of the games that we're seeking to develop. We're conscious of the good things that games provide, and from an entertainment perspective, we're equally aware through our work with the New Zealand Game Developers Association and others that we need to be conscious of other issues. So we think the target is ambitious, but we're starting from a good solid base. But equally, the working group and the partners that have sat around in the development of code are acutely aware of the principles that they would like to see this project deliver in relation to that challenging $1 billion target.
Thank you, that sounds good. Is it possible for you to email those principles to us?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Cheers.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you. Fraser, can you just elaborate a little bit further about the Future Games Sweden and their work with the Polytech?
Certainly, and I'm sure Ms O'Brien will be able to chip in for the bits that I missed out on. Future Games is a entity which is based out of Stockholm in Sweden. It's been widely regarded as the second best vocational training program globally for gaming. I can't actually recall off the top of my head the first, but it was certainly a relationship was opened through Tabitha Hayes and Tim Ponting to actually see whether or not we could, in effect, take the learnings from Future Games and apply them within Dunedin. So far, that relationship has developed very strongly, and we now have an arrangement whereby the Otago Polytechnic is now working with Future Games in Stockholm to actually start looking at picking up some of the learnings, the vocational opportunities and programs to bring back to Dunedin. And it goes back to Ms O'Brien's point that if we get this pipeline right and businesses and companies actually see the quality and number of graduates coming through these vocational programs, it'll again make Dunedin, it'll reiterate Dunedin's, reiterate Dunedin as the home for gaming within New Zealand.
Councillor Raddick.
A key purpose of code is to grow businesses using digital technology here in Dunedin, and games in particular. Is that right? Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah. So leading to the question, prefacing the question, item number 5, the working group has 5 people plus a chairman, and none of them are from private enterprise. So none of them appear to, well, with the possible exception of Ms Ruckstuhl, but none of them seem to have any business experience of growing their own private enterprise businesses.
Why is that? It's a very good observation there, Councillor Raddick. We do have, we used to have another representative sitting around the table of the working group, which was a guy called Tim Ponting, who has since left the working group because he has now been appointed as the establishment director of Code. So Tim, in fact, has changed roles within Code. It wasn't appropriate for him to obviously sit on the working group and also be the establishment director, but he certainly does bring that presence and that drive and those industry connections to ensure that we are operating in an environment which does meet industry need. It's one of those things that you do look at after a while, and there could be an evolution. There is likely to be an evolution as the legal entity is developed in terms of the seats that will be around there for the shareholders and the directors in there as well. And Ms O'Brien has just reminded me very ably that we also had, in the original steering group for Code, we had Ian Taylor, and we also had Ryan Baker from Timely on there as well. We are acutely aware of the importance of having industry voice within there, but at the moment it's probably structured in a slightly different way.
So back to the question, sorry, why is there not anyone on there now? Why is there not anyone on there? Leave it at the now.
The industry presence that we had on there has now stepped off. This is an establishment board, establishment group. In the future, there is likely to be industry on there as we grow, as it rolls out as a legal entity.
So, do you have a plan to get someone, some business growth person on there?
In short, we will.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Yeah, just following up from that, because Ian Taylor and Ryan Baker are awesome, and they would have been great, but obviously they've stepped down now. But will we be actively looking for people like them of that calibre? Because, I mean, they've got heaps of experience, and I agree with Councillor Raddick, like, it's missing. You know, if you haven't got that experience, they don't know the industry, so you need people who know the industry well.
Look, we're seeking the best possible board structure when we get to that position with Code. We were absolutely fully aware that Code will live and die on its industry engagement, and that it's proving that it provides a service to industry to grow business. So there will certainly be an overlay, whether or not it's in the director or in the governance structure within there, in terms of having the industry embedded in there. It's certainly not intended to be just a public sector body overlaying an industry group.
Because, I mean, you could be at risk, the dynamics of the makeup of directors who haven't got that experience will be completely different to ones who have, and I think that I would hope that that's going to be something that will be treated with urgency, because otherwise...
Is this a question?
Yeah, that's the question, is will it be treated with urgency?
Thank you. Yeah, it's certainly something that we're conscious of, and we're certainly making sure that there's a good extension there with entities such as the New Zealand Game Developers Association as well.
Just a reminder that we now have 35 minutes to complete the agenda, and we all have to attend the next meeting, so please keep questions short, and I'm looking for someone who's prepared to move. Councillor Wiley's moving, so seconded Councillor Raddick. And Councillor Raddick, you wish to have a question?
Yes, but as my last question, relatively concise. So the structure of the committee, of the working group, looks good and is developing, people to work in the industry, which is great. But you've got Tim Ponting's group. Is that going to be for actually getting businesses off the ground? Is that going to be more their focus, or are they like sit equally, or is one below the other? How does that structure work?
One of the parts of the shareholding agreement that we're looking for Code Limited is creation of a local entity, a local group of representing industry within the city. So yes, it would be part of that wider group going forward.
So it just occurs to me that you've got 10 million, you could go half and half. 10-5 is going to sort out people to work in the industry and provide feedstock for those businesses, and 5 million could be given to a private enterprise group, and their job is to identify the best, pick the winners and grow 10 of them.
I think there might be a bit of confusion, councillors, that we've got an interim board at the moment that will be proposing a new legal structure that will take all of the funding and delivery responsibilities that we have with the Crown as their work plan into the future. How that looks will be subject to further decision making of council when we bring back recommendations for shareholding and directors, so you will get a chance to have a discussion and input into that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In speaking to this paper, Code has been with us since 2017, when the government, the Labor government, when campaigning, talked about the Centre of Digital Excellence and committed funding to it and the $10 million. It's great to see this finally evolving and get to the point where we're at. The one part that really sort of hits home is when we think of niche games for the health industry, as it's commented here. When you look at a report from the National Centre for Biotechnology Information, we see that actually video games improve 69% of psychological therapy outcomes, 59% of physical therapy outcomes, 50% of physical activity outcomes, 46% of clinical skills outcomes, 42% of health education outcomes, and 42% of pain distraction outcomes, and 37% of disease self-management outcomes. So some really positive stats that really will take Code and lift it above and make it world class. But the big part of it is that here in Dunedin we've got the Polytech, the University of Otago, the local Runanga and Ngatahu, all on board. But more importantly, we're using international expertise that are waitlists. You know, the future games coming out of Sweden and the smart minds from the Aberdeen University in Scotland. And one thing I think we missed today was that there is a grants program of $700,000 that will go to local businesses that want to get involved in this and apply to that grant funding. So I think overall Dunedin is perfectly positioned, and this is a real positive for our city. And the quicker we get moving on this and rolling it out, I think it's going to be exciting.
Councillor O'Malley.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just a comment on Games for Health. I was fortunate to be at a conference in Washington DC at the New Zealand Embassy about 10 years ago, looking at New Zealand companies that were interacting with the American military. And there was a company from Wellington there that had a gaming company that was dealing with traumatic brain injury and stroke recovery. And I thought they must still exist, and I found them. Their name is AbleX. They have an active product. It is a working and actually financially viable example of a company where gaming is used, in this case in neurological damage and in stroke recovery primarily, and therefore you can see that there is actually a link between these kind of activities and some of the outcomes we're speaking about, and it's not quite so light-hearted as some have made out to be.
Councillor Gary.
I wanted to say that I recall the day that I learnt during the business case that Games for Health was going to be part of Code's remit. And I was particularly moved by it because of the potential to be cutting edge and to make a difference to people's lives with the kinds of neurological diseases that are in our community. And it, for me, is the most exciting part of Code. I absolutely appreciate, though, that video games and are particularly on the up and up. And I was part of the day that the Japanese gaming firm came to Dunedin, and that was a particularly moving experience. So I became aware of how we are viewed in an international sense. But let's not underestimate the importance of this particular piece of work to our city in a national and international sense. It's something to be exceptionally proud of.
No other speakers? I'll just note in the last week our Lions Club has been looking at a project to fund basically a game for people who have dementia. So it's called Tova Taffel, and it's basically a magic light table where people with dementia can play with the light, so bounce it like a ball or across a table. So what it helps is getting their mind, hand going in a situation of dementia. So these things are there, and there's more and more of them becoming available, and they do provide a great opportunity. Councillor Wiley, your right of reply. In that case, I'll put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. On to Film Dunedin, item 8. Questions, councillors? Councillor Gary?
Quick question for Mr. Deaker. In item 4, paragraph 4, did we have I believe we did, but can you just confirm that we had representation on that group?
We, the council?
We, Dunedin.
Yes. We had 2 or 3 business people from Dunedin, 2 or 3 and creatives, and also a senior academic.
Thank you.
No other questions? Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question around how the film office is funded. Is it funded through Enterprise Dunedin, or is it separate funding?
The Dunedin Film Office is funded through Enterprise Dunedin.
I saw somewhere where it was funded through the Grow Dunedin Partnership. Was that for 1920, and how's it funded for 2021? Is that the same way?
Yeah, it was previously funded through Grow Dunedin, so it is.
And following on from that, I just have a question around what's the, I don't know if it was in here, the GDP and jobs from for the film sector.
I'll enjoy passing that one over to Mr. Deaker.
The best stat and the most recent stat we have is from the screen survey that the Stats New Zealand do, and unfortunately they announced that they were going to stop doing the screen sector survey 18 months ago. So the most recent stat we've got is an Otago-wide 48 million value in terms of the screen industry.
So we don't have any stats on jobs? Or?
That's the year 17-18, so it's quite old now.
Thank you.
Councillor Houlihan.
Thank you. I was really disappointed, as I'm sure probably most people were who were involved with anything to do with that, that we didn't get any shovel-ready money. So where are we at because of that with the production studio?
We are still considering options around there, Councillor Houlihan. And certainly there'll be ones that we'd look at bringing back, potentially non-public, but they still need to be worked through a little bit more.
Do you think, I mean, I hope we don't give up on it because I'd love to see it happen, but do you think there might be someone, a private investor that might, look at it or something? Is that an option we could consider?
There are certainly options that we would like to consider.
Okay, thank you.
Other speakers? Councillor Lafiso.
Kia ora, thank you for the report. I'm just asking about the panel of, you had a panel of stakeholders, I suppose, and some workshops, and I see that Punakaiki and Ruaumoko and Aukaha were involved. And as to the outcome in the attachment, it's kind of out of left field, but I'm just wondering, in terms of encouraging participation or having a vision for young tangata whenua performers and potential crew people, for me, because it's not explicit in the attachment, does that mean, the mana whenua present, do they not push it, or is it up to us to think about that? Because I see that you've got increased opportunities for reskilling people not in employment or training and migrants, but as far as young people who are looking for opportunities or a vision or a career in this, is there anything explicit for that?
Thank you. I think there's two sides to that. I think there's the creative and then there's the crew, the workforce, and in the industry it's called above the line and below the line. So in terms of above the line opportunities, they're immense in terms of international demand for diverse stories, and those tendrils are reaching down as far as Otago in terms of bringing unique stories and perspective to the screen. And so the panel identified that was a real strength for our region, is that we have we have a strong, engaged and incredibly creative mana whenua in our region, and those are unique stories that are little known locally, let alone internationally. And so there is an active work stream to bring Ngāi Tahu stories to screen, and the first way forward with that is perhaps through some of our playwrights. So John Broughton, for example, has got a massive catalogue of well-executed theatre, and our Ruamoko Trust similarly, and so we've had stories with, we've had conversations with Ruamoko as well about actually developing a production company for Ngāi Tahu by Ngāi Tahu that would not only tell stories but enable crew to train up in terms of the production of those stories.
So it's been moved by Councillor Wiley, seconded by myself. Councillor Wiley, do you speak to it? Any other speakers? If not, I'll put it. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Item 9, the Economic Development Committee Forward Work Programme. Councillor Barker.
I note in the Forward Work Programme that the Dunedin Destination Plan is in there, but there's no date for it to start. I wonder if there's a date for it to start, given the importance of tourism recovery.
Look, we can add that in. The start date is now. That work is underway, and we're about to go to market for organisations to assist us with that.
Thank you.
So it's been moved by Councillor Wiley. Councillor Walker, do you have a question? No, I'm seconding it. You're seconding it. Seconded by Councillor Walker. Anybody else wish to speak to this? If not, I'll put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. Actions from resolutions of the Economic Development Committee meetings. Item 10. I'm happy to move. Seconded by Councillor Wiley. Any discussion? If not, I'll put it. All in favour? Against? Carried. Items for consideration by the Chair. Nothing? Fine. So now I'll move that we move into non-public for the reasons outlined on the agenda, and that Deb Sutton from the Ministry of Social Development be permitted to remain at the meeting. Seconded by Councillor Walker. All in favour? Against? Carried. We'll break for... Please stay at the table. We'll break while the cameras are removed, and we'll carry on.